rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and the smell of wet earth mixed with old wood filled every corner of the community hall. Linnea pressed herself tighter against the cold stone wall, her knees drawn to her chest, her breathing shallow and controlled. The tablecloth hung low enough to hide her, but not low enough to make her feel secure. Nothing made her feel secure anymore. Above her, she could hear the gathering voices rising and falling like waves. Laughter that seemed too loud, too forced. The annual pack convergence, a political theater disguised as tradition, where alphas from neighboring territories came to posture and negotiate, where alliances were made over whiskey and broken over insults. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be home, quiet, invisible, the way Garrett liked her. But home had become a trap with teeth. Her fingers traced the bruise on her left wrist, 4 days old, fading from purple to that sickly yellow-green that made her stomach turn. He grabbed her there when she'd spoken at dinner. Spoken such a small rebellion. She'd suggested they visit her sister, and his hand had clamped down like a vice, his eyes going flat and cold in that way that meant she'd crossed some invisible line only he could see. "You don't make plans," he'd said, voice low and measured. "You don't make decisions. You barely make sense half the time, Linnea." Linnea, her name in his mouth always sounded like an accusation. She'd run tonight, finally. After 3 years of walking on eggshells, of making herself smaller and quieter, and less, she'd waited until he'd left for the convergence. He was a beta in the Clearwater pack, important enough to attend, but not important enough to matter, and she'd slipped out into the rain. She'd thought about her sister's apartment, 2 towns over, about bus stations and shelters, about all the escape routes she'd memorized in her head during sleepless nights. But her feet had brought her here instead, to the one place he'd be. Stupid, reckless. But something in her needed to see it, needed to see him in his element, surrounded by others, to prove to herself that he wasn't the entire world, that there was something beyond the 4 walls he'd built around her life. The hall smelled like pine and smoke, and something wild she couldn't name. Rain hammered against the high windows, turning the glass into rivers of distorted light. She'd slipped in through the kitchen entrance, past volunteers too busy with catering to notice one more pale, rain-soaked figure in a dark coat. She'd found this table in the back corner, behind a temporary partition, and she'd crawled beneath it like a wounded animal going to ground. Above her, someone laughed, a woman's voice, bright and confident. Linnea wondered what that felt like. Confidence. The ability to occupy space without apologizing for it. Her mother used to tell her she was too soft for this world. "You feel too much, sweetheart," she'd say, brushing Linnea's hair. So pale it looked white in certain light, a trait that had made her stand out in uncomfortable ways her whole life. "You need to grow thicker skin." But she'd said it gently, like it was something precious she was trying to protect, not a flaw she wanted to fix. She'd been gone for 6 years now. Sometimes Linnea wondered what she'd say if she could see her, now hiding under a table, running from a man she'd promised to love. The voices above shifted. Someone was speaking now, projecting to reach the entire hall. A deep voice textured with authority, and something else, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. "The northern border remains contested," the voice said. "Rogue activity has increased 40% in the last quarter. We've lost 2 scouts and a family of 4. The room went quiet. Even from her hiding place, Linnea could feel the weight of that silence. "We need a coordinated response," the voice continued. "Not territory by territory, not pack by pack. This requires unity." Someone scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Unity, easy to demand when your territory isn't the one being bled dry." Alpha Merrick. Merrick, Linnea knew that name. Everyone did. Thorne Merrick, the Alpha of the Northern Coalition. Though he hated the title, he'd taken control of 5 fractured packs 7 years ago, after they'd nearly torn each other apart. He'd done it through strategy and force, and according to Garrett, through ruthlessness that made even other alphas nervous. Garrett hated him, envied him more like, spent hours ranting about upstart alphas who think they're better than the rest of us. "My territory is being bled." Thorne's voice came again, colder now. "But I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering a solution. Combined patrols, shared intelligence, a unified front. And you leading it, of course." Another voice cut in. Garrett. Linnea recognized the particular sneer in his tone. How convenient. Her chest tightened. She should leave. Should crawl out from under this table and disappear into the rain before he spotted her, before this became another thing she'd have to pay for later. but she didn't move. Leadership isn't about convenience, Thorne replied, and there was something in his voice now, something sharp enough to cut. It's about competence. If you have a better plan, Beta, I'm listening. Beta. The word landed like a slap. The room seemed to hold its breath. Watch yourself, King Garrett said, and Linnea could hear the rage underneath tightly controlled. He was good at that controlled rage, the kind that waited until you were alone and vulnerable. I'm watching everyone, Thorne said. That's my job. Footsteps heavy and deliberate moved across the floor above her. Linnea pressed herself flatter against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she was sure someone would hear it. The tablecloth shifted. A hand appeared, large, scarred across the knuckles, and then a face. He crouched down, tilting his head to look directly at her, and for a moment the entire world narrowed to his eyes. They were gray, storm gray, with flecks of something lighter, like ice catching sunlight. And they were looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger, not surprise, but something more complicated. Something that made her breath catch. You're bleeding, he said quietly. Linnea blinked, looked down. Her hand. She must have scraped it on something when she crawled under here. A thin line of red across her palm. Nothing serious, but enough to leave small drops on the stone floor. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. I'm sorry, I'll go. Don't. He said it softly, but it still sounded like a command. Then more gently, don't move. Not yet. He glanced up toward the room beyond, and Linnea realized with sudden terrible clarity that Garrett was somewhere up there. That if she emerged now, if she was seen, there would be questions she couldn't answer and consequences she couldn't avoid. What's your name? Thorne asked, returning his attention to her. Linnea, it came out automatically before she could think better of it. His gaze narrowed slightly, studying her face, the bruise on her wrist, the way she was curled into herself, making herself as small as possible. Who hurt you, Linnea? The question was so direct, so devoid of pretense, that she almost answered honestly. Almost told this stranger everything about Garrett, about the fists and the words and the slow erosion of everything she used to be. Instead, she shook her head. Nobody. I'm fine. You're under a table at a political summit, bleeding and shaking, he said. That's not fine. I just needed to. She searched for a lie that would make sense. I needed air. It was too crowded. He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened. But he didn't push. Stay here, he said finally, until the gathering breaks. Then I'll make sure you get out without being seen. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He held her gaze, and there was something in his expression that made her throat tight. Something that looked almost like recognition, like he saw not just what she was hiding from, but what she was hiding inside. But I'm going to anyway. Then he stood, and the tablecloth fell back into place, and she was alone again in her small dark sanctuary. Above her, the meeting continued, but she barely heard it. All she could think about was those eyes and the way he'd looked at her. Not with pity, but with something that felt dangerously close to understanding. She didn't know it then, but that moment, that single impossible moment of being seen, would change everything. The gathering didn't break for another 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in the dark, listening to voices debate borders and treaties and blood feuds she didn't understand. 2 hours of her legs going numb, of her back aching against the stone, of wondering what would happen when she finally had to emerge from this hiding place. She thought about Thorne's hands, the scars across his knuckles. They weren't the clean surgical scars of accidents. They were the rough, layered scars of someone who'd fought with their fists repeatedly over years. Warrior's hands. Her father had hands like that before the cancer took him. He'd been a good man, gentle, despite the violence written into his skin. Garrett's hands were smooth, unmarked. He kept them that way, deliberately used his words as weapons instead. Except when words weren't enough and he needed to remind her of her place. Then his hands became something else entirely. The voices above finally began to disperse. Chairs scraped against stone, footsteps headed toward the exits, in clusters, conversations fragmenting into smaller groups. Linnea waited, counting her breaths, trying to decide when it would be appropriate to move. The tablecloth lifted again, but it wasn't Thorne. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair cut short and angular features that seemed carved from something harder than flesh. She looked at Linnea with sharp amber eyes that missed nothing. He sent me, she said without preamble, to get you out without being noticed. Linnea stared at her, uncertain. Who Alpha Merrick? She said his name like it was obvious, like there was no other he in the world worth mentioning. I'm Cade, his second, Can you walk? Linnea's legs had gone stiff and numb from sitting so long. She nodded anyway, not trusting her voice. Kate extended a hand. Her grip was firm, pulling Linnea out from under the table with efficient strength. The hall looked different from this angle. Bigger, emptier. Most people had left, but clusters remained near the exits, talking in low voices. Linnea spotted Garrett immediately, his back to her, gesturing angrily to two other men she didn't recognize. This way, Cade said, steering her toward a side door she hadn't noticed before. Kitchen exit. Your husband's occupied arguing with the River Pass delegation about something tedious. My husband? The words sat heavy in her chest. How did you Alpha Merrick told me to look for a pale-haired woman hiding from a beta with anger management issues? She glanced at Linnea sidelong. He's observant. Noticed the way that particular beta kept scanning the room like he was looking for something he owned. The accuracy of that statement made Linnea's stomach turn. They moved quickly through the kitchen, past industrial stoves and stainless steel counters, past volunteers cleaning up the remains of the evening's catering. No one looked at them twice. Kate had the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle when they stepped outside. The night air was cold and clean, washing away the stuffiness of the hall. Linnea breathed it in deeply, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly. A black car waited in the alley. Expensive, understated. Thorne leaned against it, arms crossed, looking like he'd been carved from the same stone as the building behind them. He straightened when he saw them approach. Linnea, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice than it did in Garrett's. Not an accusation, just a name. Where can we take you? She hadn't thought that far ahead. Her sister's apartment was 2 hours away, and she had no car, no phone, no money. She'd left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need to not be in that house for one more second. She's thinking about lying, Kate observed not unkindly. Probably going to say she's fine, she can walk home something equally stupid. Linnea felt her face flush. I don't want to be trouble. Too late, Thorne said. You're already trouble. The question is what kind? He studied her for a moment, then made a decision. Get in. We'll figure it out somewhere that isn't a dark alley. Every instinct she had screamed that getting into a car with strange men, even powerful, seemingly protective strange men, was dangerous. But staying here where Garrett could find her at any moment felt more dangerous still. She got in. The interior smelled like leather and rain. Kay drove and Thorne sat in the back beside her, keeping a careful distance that Linnea appreciated more than he probably knew. They drove in silence through streets slick with water, past buildings that blurred into abstract shapes behind the rain-streaked windows. There's a refuge, Thorne said finally, on the northern edge of my territory. It's used for situations like this. You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow, when you're thinking more clearly, we'll discuss options. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask. His voice was firm but not harsh. I'm offering. There's a difference. Linnea looked down at her hands at the dried blood on her palm from the scrape she'd barely noticed. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. The car turned onto a highway picking up speed. Streetlights flickered past, creating patterns of light and shadow across Thorne's face. I know enough, he said quietly. I know what it looks like when someone's running. And I know what it looks like when they're running out of places to run to. There was something in his voice, a weight that suggested he wasn't just speaking theoretically, that he'd seen this before or maybe lived it himself in some way she couldn't yet understand. He'll look for me, she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. Garrett, he doesn't like it when I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Let him look, Kate said from the front seat, her tone sharp with something that might have been anger. Your husband made an enemy tonight when he decided to challenge an alpha in front of the coalition. Alpha Merrick has a long memory, and he doesn't forget disrespect. That's not why I'm helping, Thorne corrected, though he didn't sound particularly bothered by Cade's assessment. But she's not wrong that your husband should be more careful about who he provokes. The refuge turned out to be a cabin isolated, surrounded by dense forest, with a gravel driveway that crunched under the tires. It was smaller than Linnea had expected, but well-maintained with warm light glowing behind curtained windows. One of our pack members lives here, Thorne explained as they pulled up. Rowan, she's a healer, lost her mate 5 years ago and prefers the solitude. He paused. She also takes in people who need temporary shelter. You won't be the first. The door opened before they'd even gotten out of the car, and a woman appeared on the porch. Older, maybe in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that seemed designed for kindness. She took one look at Linnea and her expression softened into something that made Linnea's throat tight. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, and there was no pity in it, only recognition. "Come inside. You're soaked through." The interior was warm and smelled like chamomile tea and wood smoke. Rowan ushered Linnea toward a bathroom, talking in a steady, soothing stream about hot showers and dry clothes and food. Kate disappeared into what Linnea assumed was the kitchen. Thorne stood near the door looking oddly uncertain, like he'd fulfilled his purpose in getting her here but wasn't sure what came next. "Thank you," Linnea said, turning to face him. The words felt inadequate, too small for what he'd done. I don't understand why, but thank you." His gaze met hers, and for a moment something passed between them. Some current of understanding that felt too big and too fast for the situation, like they were seeing each other, really seeing each other in a way that went beyond the surface. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow will be complicated enough without you being exhausted." He left then, Kate with him, and Linnea was alone with Rowan and her gentle competence. Rowan didn't ask questions, didn't probe. Just showed her to the bathroom, left clean clothes folded on the counter, and told her there was soup on the stove when she was ready. The hot water felt like absolution. Linnea stood under the spray until her skin was pink and her fingers pruned, watching dirt and fear, and the residue of Garrett's touch circle the drain. When she finally emerged wrapped in clothes that smelled like lavender detergent, she felt almost human again. Rowan had set up the guest room, a small space with a window overlooking the forest, a bed with a thick quilt, and a lamp casting soft light across worn wooden floors. She'd left the soup on a tray by the bedside, along with tea and a glass of water. Linnea sat on the edge of the bed and realized she was crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd learned to produce silently so Garrett wouldn't hear. Real crying, the kind that shook her shoulders and made her breath hitch and left her feeling hollow and clean at the same time. She cried for the 3 years she'd lost, for the girl she'd been before Garrett, who'd believed in good men and happy endings, for her mother who'd tried to teach her to protect herself but couldn't protect her from her own need to believe she could fix broken things. And somewhere in the middle of it, she cried because a stranger had looked at her like she was worth protecting, worth the trouble, worth the risk. When the tears finally stopped, she ate the soup, simple, nourishing, exactly what she needed. Then she crawled under the quilt and let exhaustion take her under. She dreamed of rain and tables and hands reaching through darkness. She dreamed of running through forests where the trees had eyes. And she dreamed of a voice saying her name without accusation, like it was something precious instead of something broken. When she woke, weak sunlight was filtering through the curtains and she could hear voices from somewhere else in the cabin. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, and panic flared bright in her chest. Then she remembered. The gathering. Thorne. Rowan. Shelter, however temporary. She got up slowly, her body stiff from yesterday's tension. Someone had left more clothes outside the door, jeans and a soft sweater that fit reasonably well. She dressed and ventured out into the main room. Rowan was at the stove making breakfast. And sitting at the small kitchen table looking like he belonged there despite everything suggesting he didn't was Thorne. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted. Relief maybe that she was still there, that she hadn't disappeared in the night. "Morning," he said. "We need to talk about what happens next." The coffee Rowan poured her was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed to anchor herself in this strange new reality. Linnea sat across from Thorne at the small kitchen table, hyper-aware of the space between them, of the way the morning light caught the sharp angles of his face. "Garrett filed a missing person report," he said without preamble. 2 hours after the gathering ended. "Claims you're mentally unstable, that you've wandered off before, that he's worried for your well-being." The coffee turned to ash in her mouth. Of course he had. Of course he'd turned her escape into a narrative where he was the concerned husband and she was the broken wife who couldn't be trusted with her own decisions. "He's lying," she said, but even to her own ears, it sounded weak, defensive. I know Thorne said his certainty surprising her, but that doesn't matter to the authorities who don't know either of you. What matters is that he's established a pattern. If you go back, I'm not going back." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with something that might have been the first spark of real anger she'd felt in years. "I'm not. I can't." Rowan set a plate of eggs and toast in front of her, her hand briefly touching Linnea's shoulder and in silent support. She'd been through this before, Linnea realized. Maybe not her own escape, but she'd helped others make theirs. She knew the script. Good, Thorne said, and there was approval in his voice that made something warm unfurl in Linnea's chest. Then we need a plan. You can't stay here indefinitely. This place is known to too many people, and Garrett has connections in the Clearwater Pack. Eventually someone will talk. I have a sister, Linnea offered to in Millbrook, but I don't have a way to contact her, and I don't want to put her in danger if Garrett. I'll handle Garrett, Thorne interrupted, and there was something in the way he said it, something cold and final that made her wonder exactly what handle meant in his world. First priority is getting you somewhere protected, somewhere he can't find you, can't reach, you can't manipulate the situation to force you back. Kate appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. The sister checks out. Married, 2 kids, husband's a teacher. No pack affiliation, clean. Linnea blinked. You investigated my sister? We investigated everything. Cade said, unapologetic. Your marriage records, your husband's employment history, his connections, his reputation. Did you know he's been written up 3 times for aggressive behavior at pack functions? Formal complaints that got buried because his alpha didn't want the hassle. Linnea hadn't known. Garrett had always been so careful to present himself as reasonable, controlled, respected. The idea that others had seen through him, had documented his behavior, felt both validating and sickening. There's something else, Thorne said, his tone shifting into something more formal. Your husband's pack, Clearwater, has been making noise about my territory for months. Small things. Boundary disputes, challenges to patrol routes, questions about resource distribution. Nothing actionable, but enough to be irritating. You think Garrett's involved in that? Linnea asked, trying to follow the political implications. I think Garrett is a beta with aspirations he'll never achieve, and resentment about it, Thorne said bluntly. Men like that are dangerous because they're always looking for leverage, always trying to prove they're more than what they are. You leaving him, that's a loss of control, a public humiliation if it gets out. The egg sat heavy in Linnea's stomach. So what are you saying? And I'm saying that protecting you isn't just about keeping you sheltered from an abusive husband. It's about managing a political situation that could escalate if it's not handled carefully. He leaned forward, and she could see the intensity in his face. I'm offering you sanctuary in my territory, official sanctuary under my protection as the alpha of the Northern Coalition. It's a statement, a line in the sand. The implications of that crashed over her like a wave. That would make Garrett's problem your problem. That would put you in conflict with his pack. We're already in conflict, Kate interjected. This just makes it official. But why? Linnea looked between them, trying to understand. Why would you take that risk for someone you don't know? There has to be an angle, something you're getting out of this. Thorne was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more personal than she'd heard it before. 7 years ago, when I took control of the Northern Coalition, it was because the previous alpha had run it into the ground. Corruption, abuse of power, territories, bleeding resources to line his pockets, while pack members suffered. He paused, his jaw tightening. He had a mate. She stayed quiet for years, supported him, publicly played the role of the perfect alpha's wife. And then one day she disappeared. Just gone. No body, no evidence, nothing. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly heavier. We never found her, Thorne continued, but we found enough to know what had happened. The violence that had been hidden behind closed doors. The control, the isolation, the systematic destruction of who she'd been before him. He met her gaze directly, and there was old pain there, old rage. I swore then that anyone who came to me, running from that kind of situation, would find protection. No questions, no politics, no calculations about what it would cost me. It's not negotiable. Linnea felt something crack open inside her. Some wall she'd built around the part of her that still believed in good people, doing good things for no reason other than it was right. I don't know what to say, she managed. Say yes, Rowan said gently. Say you'll accept the help being offered. Linnea looked at Thorne, at the scarred hands resting on the table, at the face that had seen too much violence but somehow hadn't gone cold. At Cade, standing in the doorway like a sentinel, fierce and protective. At Rowan, who'd lost her own mate, but still opened her home to strangers fleeing their own nightmares. Yes, she said. Yes. Thank you. Thorne nodded once satisfied. Then we move you today. There's an apartment above a bookstore in North Haven, a town about 40 minutes from here. The owner is one of ours. He'll ask no questions and keep you secure while we get the legal framework in place. Legal framework, Linnea repeated. Sanctuary isn't just a word, Kate explained. It's a formal claim filed with the regional council. Your husband can contest it, but with the documentation we have, his complaints about aggressive behavior, your testimony, it won't hold up. The council doesn't look kindly on alphas or betas who can't control themselves in public. They certainly don't look kindly on domestic violence. How long does it take, Linnea asked. The process, 6 to 8 weeks for a hearing, Thorne said. Until then, you're under my protection. That means Garrett can't legally approach you, contact you, or enter coalition territory without facing consequences. And if he does anyway, then he'll learn why people don't cross me twice, Thorne said simply. They left within the hour. Linnea had nothing to pack, nothing to take except the clothes Rowan had given her, and a small bag with toiletries and a notebook the older woman pressed into her hands. Right, Rowan said, even if it's just feelings, fragments, things that don't make sense yet. Writing helps you process what words can't capture. Linnea hugged her, this woman she'd known for less than 12 hours, who'd shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in 3 years. Thank you, she whispered. Come back and visit, Rowan replied. When you're ready, when you're healed enough to remember this place without it hurting. The drive to North Haven was quiet. Kay drove again, and Thorne sat in the back with Linnea, close enough that she could feel his presence, but distant enough that she didn't feel crowded. The bookstore was called Crow's Corner, a 3-story brick building on a street lined with old maples. The ground floor was all windows and warm light shelves visible from the street. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, slightly weathered but carefully maintained. Silas Crow met them at a side entrance, a man in his late 60s with white hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners like he smiled often. He looked at Linnea with those knowing eyes and simply nodded. Upstairs, he said, handing her a key. Everything you need. I bring dinner up around 6 if you want company, or I leave it by the door if you don't. Your choice every day. The apartment was a studio, one large room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and windows that overlooked the main street. Simple furniture, a bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a small table with 2 chairs and shelves, so many shelves already filled with books. Silas knows what it's like, Thorne said quietly, standing in the doorway. To need a place where the world can't reach you for a while. He'll look out for you. Linnea turned to face him, this man who'd upended her entire existence in the span of 12 hours. I don't know how to repay this. You don't repay it, Thorne said. You survive it, you heal from it. And if you can, eventually you help someone else survive theirs. That's how it works. He handed her a phone, simple, prepaid. My number's programmed in. Cade's, Rowan, Silas's. You need anything, you call. Anytime, day or night. You see Garrett, you feel unsafe. You just need to hear another voice, you call. Linnea took the phone, her fingers brushing his, and felt that current again. That recognition. I will. 3 days, Thorne said. Give yourself 3 days to just breathe. Don't think about what comes next. Don't try to make plans. Just exist. Then we'll start figuring out the rest. And then he was gone, and she was alone in this small, protected space above a bookstore in a town she'd never heard of, with a phone full of numbers belonging to people who'd decided she was worth saving. Linnea walked to the window and looked out at the street below. People going about their ordinary lives. A woman with a stroller, an elderly couple holding hands, a teenager on a skateboard. Normal. All of it so beautifully, impossibly normal. She pulled out the notebook Rowan had given her, sat at the small table, and wrote the first words that came to her mind. Day 1. I'm still here, I'm still breathing. That's enough for now. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The first 3 days passed in a fog of processing. Linnea woke each morning to sunlight filtering through unfamiliar windows, momentarily disoriented before the weight of her new reality settled over her like a second skin. She was free. She was protected. She was also completely untethered from everything she'd known for the past 3 years. Silas brought dinner each evening, leaving covered plates outside her door, with quiet respect for her need for solitude. Chicken and vegetables the first night, soup and fresh bread the second, pasta with herbs from his garden the third. Each meal came with a small note in careful handwriting. Take your time, no rush. You're sheltered here. On the fourth morning, Linnea finally ventured downstairs. The bookstore was empty except for Silas, who stood behind an old wooden counter, organizing receipts. He looked up when she entered, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. Morning, coffee's fresh if you want some. She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. He poured her a cup from a pot that smelled like heaven, strong and dark and real. You a reader, he asked, not pushing, just offering conversation if she wanted it. I used to be. Before. He understood the weight of that before. Everyone who ended up in places like this understood what before meant. Well, he gestured to the shelves surrounding them, thousands of stories waiting on weathered spines, plenty of time to remember how. Take whatever you want, consider it part of the rent. I can't pay rent, Linnea said quietly. I don't have anything. Already paid, Silas replied. And before you ask by who or why or any of that, just accept it. Alpha Merrick takes care of his people. You're one of his people now. That afternoon, Linnea called her sister. The number Thorne had programmed into the phone, a lifeline to the world she'd left behind. Fiona answered on the second ring. Hello, Fee, it's me. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Linnea, oh my God, Linnea, where are you? Garrett's been calling everyone saying you disappeared, that you're sick, that he's so worried. I didn't know if I should believe him or don't believe him. Linnea interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. Fee, I'm okay. I'm protected. I left him. More silence. Then quietly, thank God. The relief in those two words made Linnea's throat tight. They talked for an hour. Linnea explained what she could without giving away her location, without putting Fiona in a position where Garrett could extract information. Fiona cried, apologized for not seeing it sooner, for not pushing harder when Linnea had seemed so distant over the past few years. I wanted to tell you, Linnea said, so many times, but he was always there, always listening, and I was so afraid of what he'd do if I reached out. You're out now, Fiona said fiercely. That's what matters. Where are you staying? Can I come see you? Not yet. Soon. There are some legal things that need to happen first. But Fee, I'm somewhere good. There are people helping me. Good people. After they hung up, Linnea sat in the window seat of her apartment and cried again. Different tears this time. Not grief or fear, but release. The validation of her sister's immediate belief, the absence of doubt or blame. Thorne came by that evening. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, recognized them somehow. The measured pace that spoke of controlled strength. He knocked once, waited. She opened the door to find him standing there with takeout bags and an expression that was almost uncertain. Thai food, he said. You mentioned once at Rowan's that you used to love it before Garrett decided it was too spicy for his refined palate. Figured it was time to reclaim it. The specificity of that memory, that he'd held on to something so small, made her chest ache. They sat on the floor because the apartment didn't have a proper table, eating out of containers and talking about nothing important. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled before life got complicated, the weird politics of small-town pack dynamics. You're different than I expected, Linnea said, without thinking, then immediately regretted it. He raised an eyebrow. How so? Garrett always talked about alphas like they were, I don't know, aggressive, domineering, all ego and violence. Some are, Thorne said neutrally. It's easy to confuse strength with cruelty, to think that power means you have to constantly prove it. He set down his container, his expression thoughtful. Real strength is knowing when not to use it, when to be gentle instead of forceful, when to protect instead of dominate. Is that why you took over the Northern Coalition? To be different, I took over because someone had to and no one else was willing to do what needed to be done. He met her gaze directly. But yes, I wanted to prove that leadership could be about building something instead of just breaking things. They talked until the food was cold and the windows had gone dark, and when he finally left, Linnea stood at the door longer than necessary, watching him disappear down the street, feeling something she couldn't name unfurling in her chest. On the seventh day, Garrett found her. Linnea was in the bookstore when it happened, helping Silas organize a shipment of new arrivals. He'd invited her down to assist, and she'd welcomed the distraction, the simple pleasure of touching books and breathing in the smell of paper and ink. Her hands were full of paperbacks when the door chimed and he walked in. Garrett. The book slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with soft thuds that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. He looked the same. Dark hair, perfectly styled, expensive jacket, that smile he used in public that never quite reached his eyes. But there was something else now. Something she'd learned to recognize in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. Rage barely contained. Linnea, her name and his voice made her skin crawl. Thank God, I've been so worried. Silas appeared from behind the counter, his elderly frame somehow seeming larger, more solid. Can I help you? I'm here for my wife, Garrett said, not taking his eyes off Linnea. She's been unwell, confused. I've come to take her home. I'm not going anywhere with you. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out anyway. I'm staying here. His expression shifted just for a moment, just enough for her to see the real Garrett underneath the concerned husband mask. Sweetheart, you're not thinking clearly. You need help. Professional help. I've been talking to doctors. You've been talking to lawyers, Linnea corrected, finding strength she didn't know she had. Setting up a narrative where I'm unstable so you can control me. I know what you're doing, Garrett. I'm not going back. This is absurd. He took a step forward and she took one back, her hip hitting a bookshelf. You're my wife. We have a life together. You can't just run away because we had a disagreement. A disagreement? The words tasted bitter. Is that what you call it when you grab me hard enough to leave bruises? When you tell me I'm worthless? That I'm lucky you put up with me? Silas moved between them, positioning himself as a barrier. I think you should leave. Garrett's jaw tightened. This is between me and my wife. You have no right to interfere. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, he has every right. Thorne stepped into the bookstore and the entire atmosphere shifted. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 6'1", but he carried himself in a way that made the space seem smaller, more charged. Cade followed him in, along with two other wolves Linnea didn't recognize, both large and unmistakably capable of violence. Garrett's expression went carefully neutral. Alpha Merrick, this is a private matter, not anymore. Thorne's voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Linnea has claimed sanctuary in my territory. That makes her welfare my concern. Sanctuary, Garrett laughed, but it sounded forced. That's a pretty dramatic word for what's essentially kidnapping. Careful, Cade said softly, and there was warning in it. Linnea came here of her own free will. Thorne continued. She's under my protection now. If you have legal concerns, you are welcome to file them through appropriate channels. But you will not harass her, threaten her, or attempt to remove her from this territory against her will. She's my wife, Garrett repeated, and Linnea could hear the desperation creeping into his voice, now the control slipping. You can't just decide she belongs to you instead. She doesn't belong to anyone, Thorne said, and there was cold finality in his tone. That's the point you seem to be missing. She's a person, not property, and she's made her choice. Garrett turned his attention back to Linnea, his expression shifting into something that might have looked like hurt if she didn't know better. Linnea, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about our vows, our life together. I love you. I can change. We can work through this. It was the same script he'd used before during the other times she'd threatened to leave. The promises and apologies and tears that would last exactly long enough to make her stay, and then everything would go back to the way it was. I don't believe you, she said, and it felt like breaking free of chains she hadn't realized were still holding her. I don't believe you'll change, and I don't believe you love me. I think you love controlling me, and I'm done being controlled. Something dangerous flashed across his face, the mask dropping completely for just a second. You're going to regret this. When he's done with you, when you realize you've thrown away everything for some alpha's whim, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be there. Good, she said. Thorne moved forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. You need to leave now. If you come back, if you contact Linnea again, without going through official channels, I will consider it a direct threat to someone under my protection. And I don't tolerate threats. For a moment, Linnea thought Garrett might actually try something. His hands were clenched into fists, his whole body vibrating with barely suppressed violence. But he was a beta facing down an alpha with clear backup, and he wasn't stupid enough to start a fight he couldn't win. This isn't over, he said, directing the words at her, but keeping his focus on Thorne. Yes, Thorne replied quietly, it is. Garrett left the door chiming behind him with a cheerful sound that felt obscenely inappropriate for the tension still crackling in the air. Linnea stood there, shaking her knees suddenly weak, her breath coming in short gasps. Easy, Thorne said, and suddenly he was beside her, his hand on her elbow, supporting, not restraining. Breathe, you're sheltered here. He'll come back, she managed. He always comes back. Let him try. Cade's voice was sharp with anticipation. We'll be ready. Silas brought water, and Thorne guided Linnea to a chair in the back corner of the store. The two wolves he'd brought with him positioned themselves near the windows watching the street. I'm sorry, she said, when she could finally speak without her voice shaking. I brought this to your territory, your business. Stop apologizing, Thorne said, crouching down so they were eye level with him. You didn't bring anything. He did, and we knew this was coming. How did you know he'd find me? Because men like him always do. They can't stand losing control, so they escalate. His expression was grim. We've had someone watching the perimeter of town since you arrived. He showed up yesterday asking questions trying to locate you. We made sure he did. She blinked. You wanted him to find me. I wanted him to try. Thorne corrected. I wanted him to make his move in a controlled environment with witnesses where we could establish clear boundaries and make it obvious that any further attempts would have consequences. He paused. I'm sorry if that feels manipulative, but it was necessary. It did feel manipulative. It also felt like the first time in years someone had actually planned something, with her well-being as the priority rather than her compliance. What happens now? Now we file a formal sanctuary claim with the regional council. Cade said, pulling out her phone. We document this confrontation. Silas, you'll need to give a statement, and we make it clear that any further harassment will be considered a violation of territorial law. Garrett's alpha won't like that, one of the copper-haired wolves observed. Let him push, Thorne said, standing. I'm tired of playing nice with packs that think abuse is a private matter. The rest of the day passed in a blur of statements and phone calls in legal language Linnea barely understood. Thorne had a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Sloane Harding, who arrived within an hour and immediately started building a case with ruthless efficiency. She asked Linnea questions she didn't want to answer, documented things she'd tried to forget, and never once looked at her with pity. You're not the first, Sloane said when they were done, her voice matter-of-fact. And you won't be the last. But you're one of the lucky ones. You got out and you have protection. A lot of women don't. By evening, Linnea was exhausted, emotionally wrung out in a way that made her whole body ache. Thorne insisted on walking her back to the apartment, even though it was only a block away, and the town was crawling with his wolves. You don't have to babysit me, she said as they climbed the stairs. I'm not babysitting. He trailed off, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm making sure you're okay. They reached the door to her apartment, and she fumbled with the key, her hands still shaking slightly from residual adrenaline. Thorne took it gently, unlocked the door, handed the key back. Thank you, she said. For today, for all of it. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze searching her face. You were brave in there, standing up to him. That took courage. I was terrified. Courage isn't not being afraid, he said softly. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. There was something in the air between them, some current of understanding that felt too big for the narrow hallway, too intimate for people who'd known each other for barely more than a week. She was suddenly acutely aware of how close he was standing, of the way his presence seemed to fill the space without overwhelming it. Why do you care? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Really? I know what you said about the previous alpha's mate about your oath, but why do you care about me specifically? He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and careful. Because when I saw you under that table, hiding and bleeding and trying so hard to be invisible, I saw something I recognized. Not in my own past, but in what I've spent 7 years trying to prevent. And I realized that all the territory I've claimed, all the power I've accumulated, all the changes I've made, none of it matters if I can't protect one person who needs it. His hand came up, hovering near her face, but not quite touching, like he was asking permission for something neither of them had named yet. You matter, Linnea, he said quietly. Not because of politics or strategy or what it means for my territory. You deserve to be protected and treated with basic human decency. It's really that simple. Her throat was tight. It's not simple at all. No, he agreed. I suppose it's not. He dropped his hand, stepping back, put careful distance between them again. Get some rest. We're moving you somewhere more secure tomorrow. Garrett knows where you are now, and while I don't think he's stupid enough to try anything, I'm not taking chances. Okay, she said, because she couldn't think of anything else. The following weeks unfolded in a pattern of slow adjustment and mounting tension. The sanctuary claim was filed with the regional council, setting in motion a legal process that Sloan warned would take at least 8 weeks to resolve. In the meantime, Linnea existed in a strange limbo, neither fully trapped nor completely free. Thorne visited regularly, always with some practical excuse. Updates on the legal proceedings, news from the council coordination about increased security measures. But they both knew these were pretenses. He came because they both needed the connection, the quiet reassurance that came from shared space and honest conversation. During the second week, Linnea began working in the bookstore. Not for money, Silas insisted. He wouldn't accept payment, but for the structure it gave her days. The simple pleasure of organizing shelves, recommending books to customers, existing in a space where her past didn't define her present. She was reshelf fiction one afternoon when Rowan appeared carrying a photo album wrapped in faded cloth. "Can we talk?" the older woman asked, settling into one of the reading chairs in the back corner. Linnea joined her, curious and slightly apprehensive. "There's something I need to tell you." Rowan began, opening the album to reveal photographs of women. 4 of them, different ages, different backgrounds, but all sharing a particular expression. The haunted look of people who'd survived something terrible. "These are the other women Thorne has helped over the past 7 years. Women who came to him running from situations like yours." Linnea studied the faces, feeling a strange kinship with people she'd never met. This one, Rowan pointed to a young woman with dark hair and frightened eyes. Her name was Cassidy. Thorne helped her escape 4 years ago, set her up in a neighboring territory, got her legal protection, gave her everything she needed to start over. She paused, pain crossing her features. 6 months later, she went back to her abuser. Told everyone she'd made a mistake, that she'd overreacted, that he'd changed. 3 months after that, she was dead. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of horror and recognition. "Thorne blames himself," Rowan continued quietly. "He thinks if he'd done more, watched closer, been more vigilant, he could have saved her. That's why he's so careful with you. Why he checks in constantly. Why he's building such extensive documentation. Why he seems almost obsessive about your security. He failed someone once, and it broke something in him. He's terrified of failing again." Linnea felt the weight of that responsibility settle over her. What if I'm the one who breaks his faith in this? What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough to— "Stop," Rowan interrupted gently. "You're not responsible for his healing any more than he's responsible for yours. I'm telling you this so you understand where he's coming from, not so you'll feel obligated to be anything other than exactly what you are, which is a person doing the hard work of surviving and figuring out what comes next." She closed the album, met Linnea's gaze directly. "And I'm telling you this because you need to know that leaving is just the first step. The real work comes after. The therapy, the rebuilding, the constant choice to keep choosing yourself even when every instinct tells you to fold back into familiar patterns. It's not linear and it's not easy. Some days you'll feel strong, other days you'll want to go back because at least the familiar pain is predictable." "Is that what happened to you?" Linnea asked softly. "Did you want to go back every single day for the first year?" Rowan admitted. "Even knowing what he'd done, part of me was so conditioned to his presence that the absence felt worse than the abuse. That's what people don't understand about situations like ours. It's not about loving the abuser. It's about the neural pathways they've carved into your brain, the way they've rewired your entire sense of normal. How did you stop wanting to go back? Time, therapy, building a life that was mine instead of his, and honestly getting angry, really properly angry instead of just afraid." She smiled slightly. "Rowan Blackwell, the woman I am now, she's furious. At him, at the system that protected him, at all the people who saw and did nothing. That anger gave me energy when everything else felt depleted." By the 4th week, Linnea had begun therapy with a counselor Sloan recommended. Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s who specialized in trauma recovery, didn't ask her to tell her story in chronological order or make sense of things that didn't make sense. Instead, she asked Linnea to describe what safety felt like in her body, to identify the physical sensations of fear versus calm, to slowly rebuild the connection between her mind and physical self that years of abuse had severed. It was harder than Linnea expected. Sitting in a comfortable office trying to articulate the difference between a panic attack and general anxiety, learning that her body had been screaming warnings she'd trained herself not to hear. "You've spent 3 years overriding your own nervous system, doctor," Chen explained during their 3rd session. Your body would send signals. This is dangerous, this person is a threat, and you'd have to convince yourself those signals were wrong because acknowledging them would mean admitting you'd made a terrible mistake in marrying him. That cognitive dissonance, that constant self-gaslighting, it does damage that takes time to undo. How much time? However long it takes, Dr. Chen said simply, there's no timeline for healing. The goal isn't to get back to who you were before Garrett. It's to discover who you're becoming after him. During the 5th week, Linnea experienced her first major panic attack since leaving. She was in the bookstore organizing a display when a man in an expensive jacket walked in. He looked nothing like Garrett, was older and heavier, but something about his posture, the way he scanned the room with proprietary assessment, triggered a cascade of physiological responses. Her vision tunneled. Her hands went numb. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She made it to the bathroom before collapsing against the wall, gasping for air that wouldn't seem to reach her lungs. Silas found her there 20 minutes later, still shaking, tears streaming down her face. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her on the bathroom floor and waited until her breathing steadied. I thought I was past this, Linnea said when she could speak. I thought leaving meant it was over. Leaving means you're not actively in danger, Silas said quietly. It doesn't mean the danger never happened. Your body remembers even when your mind wants to move on. Give yourself grace for that. That evening, she called Thorne, not because she needed rescuing, but because she needed to hear his voice. He answered on the first ring. Linnea, everything okay? No, she said honestly. I had a panic attack today, a bad one, and I needed to talk to someone who understands. I'm coming over. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He arrived in 8, carrying nothing but his presence and a willingness to listen. They sat on the floor of her apartment, backs against the couch, and she told him about the man in the jacket, about the way her body had betrayed her with its memories, about feeling weak and broken and frustrated with her own healing process. You're not broken, Thorne said when she'd finished. You're recovering. There's a difference. Broken things don't heal. Recovering things do. Even if it's slow and non-linear and frustrating as hell. How do you know so much about this? He was quiet for a moment. My mother, before she died, there were signs. Things I was too young to fully understand but old enough to remember. The way she'd flinch at loud noises. How she'd apologize for everything, even things that weren't her fault. The panic attacks she'd have locked in the bathroom trying to hide them from me and my father. He stared at the wall across from them. After she died, I started reading everything I could find about domestic violence, about trauma, about the physiological impact of living in constant fear. I think I was trying to understand what I'd witnessed to make sense of why she stayed. Why she didn't just leave. It took me years to understand that leaving isn't simple when someone systematically destroyed your sense of self. Is that why you became the alpha who takes in people like me? Partly. Also because I realized I had the power to make different choices than my father. To use strength to protect instead of dominate. To prove that alphas don't have to be tyrants. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only happens between people who've seen each other's vulnerabilities and chosen to stay anyway. Thank you, Linnea said eventually, for not making me feel pathetic about the panic attack. You could never be pathetic, Thorne said. And if you need to call me after every panic attack for the next 10 years, I'll answer every single time. The hearing was scheduled for the 10th week, a cool October morning, when the leaves were just beginning to turn and the air smelled like wood smoke and possibility. Linnea dressed carefully in clothes Kate had helped her select, professional, but not performative. An outfit that said, I'm taking this seriously without screaming, I'm a victim. She'd learned there was a difference, that presentation mattered, in rooms full of powerful men who'd be assessing her credibility. The council chamber was exactly as intimidating as she'd feared. A formal space in the coalition's administrative building, all stone and dark wood, and the weight of centuries of pack politics. 5 alphas sat at a raised table, including Morrison, the council chair, whose steel gray hair and hard eyes suggested he'd seen and judged countless cases like hers. Garrett sat with his lawyer across the aisle, his expression carefully controlled. He looked thinner than she remembered, shadows under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Good, a small, vicious part of her thought. Let him know what it feels like to be afraid. Sloan presented their case with clinical precision. Medical records from an emergency room visit 2 years ago when Garrett had shoved Linnea into a doorframe hard enough to require stitches. Photographs of bruises documented by Rowan that first night. Silas's statement about the bookstore confrontation. The three formal complaints against Garrett from previous PAC functions obtained through channels Linnea still didn't fully understand. Garrett's lawyer tried to paint an alternative narrative. A troubled marriage, a woman with mental health struggles, a concerned husband dealing with a situation beyond his expertise. But each argument crumbled under the weight of documentation and witness testimony. When it came time for Linnea to speak, she walked to the stand on legs that felt steadier than they had any right to. "Tell us in your own words," Morrison said not unkindly, "why you're seeking sanctuary." Linnea took a breath and began to speak. Not about every incident that would take hours she didn't have, but about the pattern, about 3 years of systematic control of being made to feel small and worthless and incapable, about the nights she ran hiding under a table because she had nowhere else to go, about the strength it took to leave and the fear of what would happen if she was forced to return. She didn't cry, she didn't break down, she simply told the truth in a steady voice that grew stronger with each word. When she finished, the chamber was silent. "Does the respondent wish to speak?" Morrison asked Garrett. Garrett stood, and for a moment, Linnea thought he might actually apologize, might acknowledge something. Instead, he said, "My wife is confused. She's fragile, always has been. I was trying to protect her from herself. And the bruises." Morrison said, his voice sharp. "Were those protecting her too?" Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Those were accidents, misunderstandings." From the back of the chamber, a woman's voice cut through the silence. "I'd like to speak." Everyone turned. A woman in her 40s stood elegant in a way that suggested careful grooming and quiet money. Linnea recognized her from PAC functions. Garrett's Alpha's mate, Luna Thorne. Morrison acknowledged. "You have the floor." She walked forward with measured grace and turned to face the council. "Garrett Voss grabbed me at a PAC gathering 3 years ago. Hard enough to bruise, hard enough that I had to wear long sleeves for a week. When I reported it to my mate, he dismissed it as Garrett being enthusiastic, too eager to please." She paused, her voice cold. "I've spent 3 years watching this man, seeing the way he treats his wife, the way she flinched when he touched her. I said nothing because it wasn't my place, because I was told to mind my own business. I'm speaking now because someone needs to." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Garrett's face went white, then red. Luna Thorne returned to her seat without looking at him. Morrison conferred quietly with the other council members for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, he spoke. "The council finds sufficient evidence to grant the sanctuary claim. Linnea Ashford is hereby recognized as under the protection of the Northern Coalition. Garrett Voss is prohibited from entering coalition territory or contacting the petitioner through any means for a period of no less than 5 years. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution." He looked at Garrett directly. "Additionally, we are referring this matter to Clearwater PAC leadership for internal discipline. This council does not tolerate violence against partners, and we expect appropriate consequences." It was over. Just like that, 10 weeks of fear and uncertainty resolved in a formal pronouncement. Linnea walked out of the chamber into cool afternoon air, feeling like she'd left something heavy behind in that room. Not all the weight, not all the trauma, but enough that she could breathe a little easier. Thorne was beside her, had been beside her through all of it, a steady presence that asked for nothing. "You did it," he said quietly. "You're free." She turned to look at him. This man who'd saved her without expecting gratitude, who'd protected her without demanding ownership, who'd given her space to heal without pushing for more. "Not completely free yet," she said, "but closer, definitely closer." 4 weeks after the hearing, Linnea moved to the cottage at Silver Pine. It wasn't because Garrett had violated the order, though Sloan had warned it was only a matter of time. It was because he'd sent a letter to the bookstore delivered through some intermediary who didn't know or didn't care about restraining orders. The envelope had been addressed in his handwriting, her name written with the same careful precision he'd used to sign their wedding certificate. She hadn't opened it, had handed it directly to Sloan, who documented it, photographed it, added it to the growing file of evidence. But the damage was done. The sanctuary of the bookstore apartment had been compromised. The knowledge that he knew exactly where she was turning every shadow into a potential threat. The cottage was different. Remote, surrounded by dense forest, accessible only by a long gravel road that gave plenty of warning when someone approached. Stone walls thick enough to make her feel protected rather than trapped windows that looked out over trees instead of streets where Garrett might appear at any moment. It had been Thorne's plan, his backup location, the place he'd been preparing since the day she'd accepted sanctuary. He'd stocked the pantry, filled the woodshed, left books on shelves and art supplies in a closet like he'd known she'd need ways to rebuild herself. This was going to be my retirement home, he'd explained, while carrying in her few belongings, which still amounted to almost nothing. Bought it 2 years ago, haven't had time to use it. He'd set down a box of kitchen supplies, turned to face her. You're not borrowing it. I'm giving you a place to heal for as long as you need it. The first week passed in quiet solitude. Rowan visited twice, bringing groceries and spending afternoons teaching Linnea how to maintain the wood stove, how to identify edible plants in the surrounding forest, how to exist in isolation without it becoming imprisonment. You'll know when you're ready for more human contact, Rowan said, showing her how to bank the fire so it would burn through the night. Your body will tell you. Right now, it's still processing, still releasing all that stored fear. Let it. Linnea painted during those early days. Not the careful, tentative watercolor she'd done in the bookstore apartment, but wild, abstract pieces that made no sense, colors bleeding into each other like emotions she couldn't name. She painted fear as muddy browns and sickly greens. She painted rage as slashes of crimson and black. She painted hope tentatively as pale gold, breaking through storm clouds. Thorne came by on the 8th day with firewood, though the shed was already full. He knocked, waited, let her decide whether to open the door. She did because some part of her had been listening for his footsteps all week. He looked tired, she noticed. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy decisions. Everything okay? She asked, stepping aside to let him in. Council politics, he said, setting down the unnecessary firewood by the door. Clearwater PAC is pushing back on Garrett's demotion, making noise about overreach, about coalition interference in internal PAC matters. He met her gaze. Nothing you need to worry about. Just explaining why I haven't been by sooner. You don't owe me explanations, she said. You've already done more than... Don't, he interrupted gently. Don't minimize what you deserve. You deserve people who show up, who keep their promises, who don't make you feel like basic decency is some extraordinary gift. They sat by the fire that evening, talking about nothing and everything. He told her about the frustrations of trying to hold together 5 PACs with different priorities, different histories, different definitions of what loyalty meant. She told him about the paintings, about trying to express things she didn't have words for yet. Can I see them, he asked. She hesitated, then nodded, leading him to the small room she'd claimed as a studio. The canvases were propped against walls, chaotic and raw and completely honest. Thorne studied them in silence, moving from one to the next with careful attention. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. These are extraordinary. Not technically perfect, but real. You're painting what survival looks like from the inside. Is that a compliment? It's the truth. He turned to look at her. This is healing work, Linnea. Hard, necessary, important work. Don't stop. Over the following weeks, his visits became routine. Once or twice a week, and always with some practical excuse, groceries or mail, or news about the ongoing legal situation. But they both knew he came for the same reason. She listened for his truck on the gravel road. Because being together felt easier than being apart. They fell into rhythms that felt dangerously domestic. He'd arrive in late afternoon, help her with whatever project she'd taken on, fixing a loose step on the porch, organizing the shed, splitting wood, even though it didn't need splitting. Then they'd make dinner together, simple meals that tasted better for being shared, and talk until the fire burned low. He never pushed for more, never suggested he stay overnight, never made her feel like his help came with expectations. He simply showed up reliably and consistently, proving through action what words couldn't quite capture. On a cold evening in late November, 16 weeks after the hearing, Linnea realized she was falling in love with him. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, no lightning strike of recognition. It was quieter than that, more certain. She was painting and he was reading in the chair by the fire, and she looked up to find him watching her with an expression so soft it made her chest ache. What she asked, nothing. Just, you look content, really content, not that careful performance of happiness you used to wear. I am content, she said, and realized it was true. Complicated, still healing, still carrying weight, but genuinely content. That night after he left, she sat with Rowan's words echoing in her mind. He loves you, not in spite of what you've been through, but because of who you are in the face of it. The fear came then sudden and overwhelming. What if she was confusing gratitude for love? What if this was just trauma bonding? Two broken people clinging to each other because loneliness felt worse than risk. What if she was too damaged, too shattered, to know the difference between real affection and desperate need? She called Rowan at midnight, voice shaking. I think I'm falling in love with him, and I don't know if I can trust it. Don't know if I can trust myself. Rowan listened to her, spiral patient and calm on the other end of the line. Can I tell you something that might help, she said, when Linnea finally ran out of words. You're asking the right questions. That's how I know this is real. If it was just trauma bonding, you wouldn't be questioning it. You'd be rushing in desperate for anything that felt like security. Instead, you're being careful, thoughtful, protecting yourself while staying open to possibility. That's not weakness, Linnea. That's wisdom. But how do I know? How do I know I'm ready? You don't, Rowan said simply. Nobody ever knows. Not really. You just decide that the risk of staying closed is worse than the risk of opening up. And then you're honest about where you are and what you need, and you trust that the right person will meet you there. Linnea made her decision the next time Thorne visited. She'd spent the day preparing not by cleaning the cottage or cooking elaborate food, but by sitting with her fear and choosing to speak anyway. He arrived at dusk with a bag of groceries and that slightly uncertain expression he wore when he wasn't sure of his welcome. Can we talk? She said before he'd even set down the bag. Something in her voice made him go still. Of course, they sat by the fire and she forced herself to look at him while she spoke. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, not fix or solve or promise anything. Can you do that? He nodded. I think I'm falling in love with you, she said, the words tumbling out. And it terrifies me because I don't know if I can trust my own feelings. Don't know if this is real or if I'm just grateful or if I'm confusing security with affection. I don't want to hurt you by starting something I can't finish, but I also don't want to lie and pretend I don't feel what I feel. She took a shaky breath. So I'm telling you the truth, even though it's messy and uncertain. I care about you in ways that scare me. I look forward to your visits more than I probably should. I think about you when you're not here. And I'm also telling you that I don't know what to do with any of that because I'm still learning how to be a person who makes choices instead of just surviving them. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Thorne spoke, his voice low and careful. Can I say something now? She nodded. I think about you constantly, he said. When I'm in council meetings arguing about territory disputes, when I'm doing paperwork at 3 in the morning, when I'm supposed to be focused on the 100 other things that require my attention, I look for excuses to come here because being around you makes me feel more human, less like just the alpha who has to have all the answers. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. And I'm terrified too. Terrified that I'm taking advantage of a power imbalance, that you're grateful and confusing it for something else, that I'm seeing what I want to see instead of what's real. So I've been keeping my distance, trying to be patient, trying to give you space to figure out what you need without pressure. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But here's what I know. What I feel for you isn't about gratitude or rescue or any of that. It's about who you are. Your strength, your honesty, the way you're doing the hard work of healing instead of just hiding from it. I respect you more than anyone I've met in a long time. And I'm willing to wait however long it takes for you to figure out what you want. What if I never figure it out? She asked. What if I'm always this uncertain? Then we'll be uncertain together, he said simply. I'm not asking for guarantees, Linnea. I'm just asking for honesty. Tell me where you are. Tell me what you need, and I'll meet you there. What I need, she said slowly, is to know what it feels like. To be touched without fear. To be held by someone who sees me as a person, not property. To believe that kindness isn't a trap. He moved then, but slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with such gentleness it made her eyes sting. Tell me if this is too much, he said. It's not, she breathed. It's perfect. He kissed her, then soft and careful, like she was something precious that might shatter if he wasn't cautious. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were two people who'd seen too much darkness learning how to exist in the light. When they pulled apart, she was crying, but these were different tears. Tears of relief, of recognition, of finally believing that good things could happen without hidden costs. Stay, she said. Not for anything. Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight. He stayed. They sat on the couch wrapped in blankets talking until the stars came out and the forest filled with nocturnal sounds. He told her about his plans for the coalition, about the schools he wanted to build, and the reforms he was implementing. She told him about wanting to go back to school, about dreams she'd abandoned when Garrett had made her believe she was too stupid, too worthless, too broken to achieve anything. You're none of those things, Thorne said fiercely. You're intelligent and strong and capable of anything you set your mind to. Don't let his voice in your head convince you otherwise. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't dream of running. 3 weeks later, on a bitter December night, Garrett violated the restraining order. Linnea was in the cottage alone when she heard the vehicle on the gravel road. Unusual for this time of night, too late for Thorne's usual visits. She looked out the window to see an unfamiliar truck headlights cutting through the darkness. Her first instinct was to hide, to find a table to crawl under, to make herself invisible. But she'd spent months learning different responses, and Cade's training kicked in. She grabbed the phone Thorne had given her, pressed the emergency button that would alert him and the nearest patrol, then moved to the most defensible position in the cottage, back to the wall exit route clear. The knock, when it came, was aggressive, demanding. Linnea, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Garrett, drunk from the slur in his voice and furious. She didn't answer, didn't move. The phone in her hand showed Thorne's response. On my way. 10 minutes. Stay inside. 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Garrett pounded on the door again. This is ridiculous. You're my wife. You can't just hide from me forever. Then more desperately, I've lost everything because of you. My position, my reputation, my home. They exiled me, Linnea. Sent me to the furthest outpost of Clearwater territory like I'm some kind of criminal. All because you couldn't handle a little discipline. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that what he called discipline was abuse, that she didn't owe him anything, that his losses were consequences of his own actions. But Cade's voice was in her head. Don't engage. Don't give him anything to work with. Just wait. When he couldn't get a response, Garrett's tone shifted again, became wheedling, pathetic. Please, Lynn, just talk to me. I came all this way. I just want to explain, to make you understand. We can fix this. I can change, really change this time. The same script, always the same script. Headlights appeared on the road, multiple vehicles moving fast. Thorne's truck in the lead, followed by two others. Garrett must have seen them too, because his voice turned vicious. You think he loves you? He's using you, making a point to other packs about his power. You're nothing to him. Nothing to anyone. You were barely anything to me. The vehicle stopped. Doors opened. Thorne's voice cut through the night, cold and final. Step away from the door, Voss. She couldn't see what happened next, but she heard it. Garrett's protest, then the sounds of a brief struggle, then silence. A gentle knock. Linnea, it's me. You can open the door. She did, her hands shaking, to find Thorne standing there with an expression that was part concern, part barely controlled rage. You okay? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Behind him, she could see Cade and two other wolves loading Garrett into one of the vehicles. He wasn't fighting anymore, just slumped and defeated. What happens to him now, she asked. Now he faces consequences, Thorne said. Violation of a council order, trespassing on coalition territory, harassment. His own pack has already washed their hands of him. He'll likely face criminal charges. He searched her face in the dim light. Did he hurt you? Oh, she said. I didn't even open the door. Did what Cade taught me, called for help, stayed secure. Something in his expression softened. Good. That's exactly what you should have done. Later, after the other vehicles had left with Garrett, after statements had been given and reports filed, Thorne sat with her in the cottage while she processed what had happened. I thought I'd be more afraid, she said, staring into the fire. But mostly I just feel sad. Sad that he threw away everything on pride and control. Sad for the years I wasted trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. That's not weakness, Thorne said quietly. That's wisdom. The ability to see someone clearly, to hold them accountable while still recognizing their humanity. A lot of people never get there. She turned to look at him. When did you get there? With your father. He was quiet for a long time. I'm not sure I have, he admitted. I understood him eventually. Understood that his violence came from his own father, from a whole lineage of men who thought strength meant domination. But understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, and I'm not sure I'll ever get to forgiveness. Do you think I'll forgive Garrett? Maybe. Maybe not. Either way is okay. Healing doesn't require forgiveness. It just requires that you stop letting his voice define your worth. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. I don't want to be alone tonight, she said finally. You're not alone, he replied. I'm staying right here. The legal aftermath of Garrett's violation took another month to resolve. Clearwater PAC formally expelled him, washing their hands of any responsibility. Criminal charges were filed by the coalition, and Garrett pleaded guilty to avoid trial, accepting a sentence that included mandatory counseling and a permanent ban from entering multiple territories. Sloan brought the final paperwork to the cottage in mid-January, everything notarized and official. It's done, she said, setting down the thick folder. Divorce finalized, restraining order made permanent, all legal ties severed. You're free, Linnea, completely and officially free. Linnea held the papers, feeling the weight of them, the finality. Why doesn't it feel like I thought it would? Because freedom is complicated, Sloan said, not unkindly. Especially when you're grieving everything that led to needing it. Give yourself time to adjust to it. That evening, Thorne found her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, watching the sun set through bare trees. He sat beside her without speaking, close enough that she could feel his warmth, distant enough that she didn't feel crowded. I've been thinking, she said, after a while, about the future, about what I want my life to look like now that I'm not just surviving anymore. What do you want? I want to go back to school, get my degree in art therapy. I want to work with other survivors, help them find ways to express what words can't capture. She paused. And I want to build something lasting, a place where people can come to heal, where they're not just given shelter, but given the tools to rebuild themselves. Thorne was quiet, listening. I was thinking, she continued, maybe a refuge network. Multiple locations across the coalition staffed with counselors and healers and legal advocates. Not just emergency shelters, but long-term support systems. She turned to look at him. Would that be something you'd support as Alpha? He smiled, slow and genuine. Linnea, I'd do more than support it. I'd help you build it. We could start with this cottage, expand from here. Her heart felt too full for her chest. Really, really, it's a good plan, a necessary plan, and you're the right person to lead it. They sat together as darkness fell, planning futures that felt possible now, talking about logistics and funding and all the practical details of turning vision into reality. Later, when the cold drove them inside, Thorne built up the fire while Linnea made tea, and the domesticity of it struck her suddenly. This was what security felt like. Not just the absence of violence, but the presence of partnership, of mutual respect, of someone who saw her dreams as worth investing in. Can I ask you something, she said, handing him a mug. Anything. That first night when you found me under the table, did you know that it would lead to this? He considered the question seriously. I knew you deserved protection, he said finally. I knew that walking away wasn't an option, that you deserved a chance to rebuild. Did I know it would become this, that I'd fall in love with you, that we'd end up planning a future together? No. But I'm grateful it did. I love you. She said the words easier now, more certain. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are. Because you're patient and kind, and you see people's potential instead of just their pain. He set down his mug, pulled her close, kissed her forehead. I love you too. And I'm in this, whatever this becomes, for as long as you'll have me. On the first anniversary of the night she'd hidden under that table, Thorne brought her back to the cottage and asked her to be his mate. It wasn't a grand public gesture, no pack politics or ceremony planning. Just the two of them in the place where she'd learned to be whole again, with the fire crackling and snow falling outside the windows. I love you, he said simply. Not because you needed saving or because we've been through intensity together, but because of who you are, your compassion and courage and the way you see the world. I want to build a life with you. Not one where I'm the alpha and you're the mate who supports me, but one where we're partners equals two people who choose each other every day. He pulled out a simple silver ring. No diamonds, no ostentation, just solid and real. Will you choose me today and tomorrow and all the days after? She said yes through tears of joy and relief. The mating ceremony was small, just the people who mattered. Fiona and her family, Rowan Cade's Silas Sloan, and a handful of coalition members who'd become friends. No political theater, no performances for alphas who judged her or packs that had failed her. Just honest vows and genuine celebration. When Thorne marked her when they completed the bond, Linnea felt something click into place. Not ownership or possession, but recognition. Two souls that had found each other in darkness and decided to walk toward the light together. 3 years later, Linnea stood in Crow's Corner bookstore, hanging paintings for a charity exhibition. The proceeds would go to Second Chapters, the refuge network she and Thorne had built together. 3 locations now staffed by counselors and healers and advocates who understood trauma. Rowan ran the main house. Sloan directed the legal aid program. Cade taught self-defense to survivors who wanted to feel strong again. And Linnea, she worked as an art therapist, helping others find ways to express what words couldn't capture, to paint their way through grief and fear into something resembling peace. Silas watched her adjust a frame, his eyes crinkling with pride. Your mother would be proud, he said, of the woman you've become. She thought about that girl who'd hidden under a table bleeding and terrified and convinced she was too broken to deserve anything good. Thought about the long road from that moment to this one, the therapy sessions and panic attacks and slow hard work of healing. I'm proud of her too, she said softly. The door chimed and Thorne appeared, their daughter balanced on his hip. Era, barely a year old with storm gray eyes and pale hair, like winter sunlight, reached for her mother with chubby hands. Linnea took her, breathing in that perfect baby smell, feeling the solid weight of this tiny person they'd created together. Ready? Thorne asked. Ready, she confirmed. They walked out into the cool autumn afternoon, into the life they'd built together. A life where Linnea was seen and valued and loved. A life where she painted and worked and raised a child in an environment free from fear. A life where surviving wasn't the end goal. Living was. Behind them, Silas had hung a new sign above the bookstore entrance. Second Chapters, it read in elegant script. Everyone deserves one. A young woman entered the bookstore as they were leaving, moving with that particular carefulness and that Linnea recognized immediately. The hunched shoulders, the way she scanned the room before entering fully, the bruise barely visible under carefully applied makeup. Their eyes met, and Linnea saw her own past reflected back at her. She handed Era to Thorne, kissed his cheek. Give me a minute, she said softly. He understood immediately, nodded, carried their daughter to the car. Linnea approached the young woman gently, keeping her body language open and non-threatening. Hi, she said quietly. I'm Linnea. Can I help you find something? The woman's eyes filled with tears. I saw the sign. Second Chapters. I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a sign that I could have one too. Linnea's heart broke and soared simultaneously. You can, she said with absolute certainty. And I can help. I know where you are. I've been there, and there's a way out if you want it. The woman nodded, unable to speak. Come sit with me, Linnea said, gesturing to the chairs in the back corner of the bookstore. Tell me your name. Tell me your story, and then we'll figure out what comes next together. As they sat down, as the young woman began to speak in halting whispers, Linnea felt the full circle complete. From victim to survivor to advocate. From hiding under tables to pulling others out from under theirs. This was her second chapter, and it was everything she'd forgotten she deserved. Outside, the autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and possibility. Somewhere in the mountains, wolves howled a welcome to the coming night. And in a small bookstore in a town called North Haven, two women sat together in the fading light. One who'd walked the path and one who was just beginning, proving that survival was possible, that healing was real, that second chapters existed for anyone brave enough to turn the page.